It's the end of day 16 of the Undercover Policing Inquiry, Tranche 2, Phase 1. We've been listening to the live evidence of Trevor Morris, who was undercover police officer who infiltrated the SWP in the early 90s. I'm joined with Bethany Rielly, who seasoned followers of the inquiry will remember from Tranche 1, where she followed everything the whole time. She hasn't been here for most of Tranche 2, but she's here now. Bethany, what do you think of today's hearing?
Thanks for having me on. I think it started off in quite a powerful way, with a witness statement from the family of the deceased child whose identity was stolen by Anthony Lewis, by Trevor Morris. Trevor Morris, yes. Yeah. And it was, you know, as you would imagine, they kind of spoke a bit about how, sorry, it's quite distracting people going by.
It is quite different, yeah. So just in the first phase, we had a room to do this, but as in the first tranche, but in this tranche, we're just in the hallway. So, like, Beth's not really used to all the lawyers walking past us as we're doing the things.
But yeah, so they spoke about how Anthony was just 7 when he passed away, died from sickle cell anemia, which is a very painful disease. And then to compound the pain that the family went through, they then found out later on that his identity had been stolen and used by an undercover police officer to then infiltrate anti-racist groups and spy on the family of Stephen Lawrence. So I think you can't even imagine something like that. And the interesting thing was, I think Trevor Morris was in the room at the time when this was being read out, and he was then asked about it by the inquiry afterwards. And
I thought that was really powerful in the statement. The family sent a message to B and Jenny, who we heard on Monday, noting that they'd both been victims of domestic violence and that Trevor Morris had preyed on that vulnerability in order to deceive them into relationships, and just saying to them that, like, the real Anthony Lewis would have never done that, which I thought was quite a powerful statement to make.
Yeah, definitely. There was a closing paragraph as well, where I think it was the sister said that. I need to go back on my notes, but
what she said basically was that, like, that not only did Trevor Morris put the family under threat by the fact that he was pretending to be their dead son, and that supporters of the BNP who maybe had found the driving license that he lost in the name of Anthony Lewis. Anthony Lewis. That he could have. Also, they put the family in danger by him undermining anti-racist organisations for them as black people. Were under a greater threat because of that, and they were just incredibly disgusted that he'd sought to undermine things like the Family Justice Campaign for Stephen Lawrence. Just a huge betrayal of the whole thing. Really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. But then classic to true form. I think actually only one undercover officer showed any kind of remorse for using this kind of tactic. He didn't seem very fazed by it when he was asked, did you have any qualms about this? He was just like, well, at the time it was what all people working in national security did.
That was new. That was new. I mean, at the time we've heard it just that the members of the SDS did that, but I mean, he was very clear that it was used across special branch. It was used across security services to use the Jackal method. And when we first heard about this in Tranche 1, it was talked about that they went to see the Day of the Jackal in the cinema, and then they thought, oh, we'll have a go at doing that. Somebody said they were copying the KGB with it. He was saying that all security services and anybody who wanted a false identity would do that. Suggesting it had been rolled out across the rest of Special Branch in that time.
Yeah, and I don't think it's been referred to so explicitly as the Jackal tactic before, because families of children whose identities have been stolen were worried that it was just inspired. That tactic was just taken by, originated from the film, and there was no real purpose for doing it. I think the rest of the evidence, I think Trevor Morris sort of showed himself to be someone who is quite arrogant quite defensive. He cut over the council often. And so that was quite interesting to see, and there was no pulling him up on that, which, the inquiry has done with non-state corps participants before. And he opened by basically saying he has memory problems and has been to a doctor about that. But that only really applied to more controversial aspects of his deployment and not to other things that probably made him, put him in a good light. And there was he was very sharp. There were things he remembered that names. Two reports were pulled up that were about an SWP, Socialist Workers' Party member. And the inquiry thought that they were different people, but he was like, no, that's the same person.
I mean, he showed amazing powers of recall when it came to little anecdotes. He was describing exactly who he was stood with, where he was stood, a demonstration, things that there were no reports about. Either he was lying about having memory problems, or he's lying about the anecdotes. You can't have it both ways. Very contradictory.
Yeah, it's like the selective amnesia thing. Yeah. I guess other points to pull out from the 6 hour, however many hours, I can't remember. He was pulled up on, why it seemed that he was sent to specifically target anti-racism and anti-fascist groups. And he's followed the same line, which is, well, it wasn't them we were targeting. It wasn't because of those beliefs, anti-racist beliefs. It was because of other strands of thinking within these organisations. So it was much of a muchness on that front. And another interesting thing also, he was saying that he was justified in spying and doing these very specific reports about certain members within the Socialist Workers' Party and other groups, because they could end up becoming people who would be more radical than that group and being lone wolves and doing attacks outside. So it's this sort of hoovering up of information on everyone that he sees as something that's justified regardless of no privacy considerations whatsoever. And
on that thing with he was very clear, because there was a lot of stuff made of the fact that the reports were going to the security services, and he said it numerous times. He kept repeating it. It was information for special branch, it was information for security services, and it was information for our international partners in the security and police services. He mentioned that particularly he'd worked, previous to being in the SDS, he'd been in other parts of Special Branch where he'd worked on the South Africa desk and he'd worked on the Israeli desk. And he talked about how, he talked about his relationship with BOSS, I can't remember what they stand for, but the South African Security Services. This is at a time when BOSS were trying to kill ANC supporters in London. And he talked about his professional relationship with them, basically. He was dragged back from that. We had a couple of restriction orders today. One of them was false alarm. But there was definitely... he kept mentioning, I might be going to a red area here. And there was a lot of things he kind of acted like he wanted to say that it was best if he didn't. And when you were saying about him arguing with Barr, that was he used that as part of his argument. And he was like, well, when I was on the Israeli desk, and he said, you don't want me to go there, do you? And he said, and Barr was like, I don't want you to talk about anything Middle Eastern. And he went, it's not Middle Eastern, because the Israeli desk also includes the diaspora. So, and it's just why are you arguing about this, you complete nutter? But
Yeah, I guess he's sort of inflating his own importance. I don't know. This is what it felt like to me. He's like, I'm involved in all these international operations, and an interesting character. He was very different from the police witnesses I remember from the first tranche, but I don't know if,
I think that there is a change. There has been a change with the officers we've had in this tranche have been different from the first. Actually, that's just an age thing, I think. But also, I think it's partially because they'd been a more developed intelligence section, so special branch by that point. These men were like, so the ones we heard from in Tranche 1 were like ordinary cops who got like kind of turned into intelligence cops, whereas these, you got the impression they saw intelligence as part of their career. Certainly with Roger Pierce, who went on to have this big career in intelligence generally. So, I mean, they're more spook-like, I guess, for want of a better word.
Yeah, true. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, we've only really touched very briefly so far on his deployment. I think we've only really covered, well, not very much. So it'll be interesting to see what happens over the next 2 days, and if he shifts at all his position, when he's asked about Jenny and B, and when he's asked about the family justice campaigns. But yeah, I don't know if we're gonna see much more from him, other than what he's already been saying.
I mean, it's definitely. I mean, there's a lot more to come. Unlike everybody else, it's 2.5 days of questioning. I mean, like, it's now 6:30. We started at 1 o'clock. 1:30 with him. So, the half a day has been best part of 6 hours of questioning. So there's a lot more to come. Barr generally leaves the big issues towards the end of his questioning. So I think, we'll find out a lot more as time goes on. He does seem a bit of a, he's very sure of himself. He kept like kind of. Some of the things he was saying he was finding funny, and was like kind of a little chuckle to himself about, which he's quite confident, he's quite sure of himself in this process. I mean, doesn't stop him from tripping up a few times with saying things he shouldn't say. Let's hope he says things that he shouldn't say, that he thinks he shouldn't say, but are still allowed to go out into the record. We'll see how that goes.
He was chuckling about how he was really good friends with Chris Bambury.
Yeah, Chris Bambury. Yeah. I mean, that was quite interesting because, like, for anybody who's read the reports or like followed the evidence of B and Jenny and Lindsay German last week, it's very clear that he's a real. He reported extensively on Chris Bambury, and obviously from the reports doesn't like him. He goes on. He was very, very good friends with Chris Bambury and liked him a lot. Which, I mean, you're not friends of any of these people. He said another weird thing, actually, which was kind of connected. He said, just because I reported on something doesn't mean I don't agree with it. This is the insane doublethink you can only get from a spy. Of course, like, whether you agreed with it or not, you're undermining it. These aren't your friends. You don't spy on your friends. You don't lie about your friends. You don't report on your friends to the security services. That's not how the world works. But yeah, I mean, he really had a problem with Chris Bambury, but like trying to pretend he was a friend of his, it was a particularly odd one. Chris Bambury, again, somebody who's been mentioned a lot. We've had a lot of these in this phase. Someone who's been mentioned a lot. He's still around. He's still politically active. I'm sure he'll be more than willing to come and be a witness at the inquiry. He hasn't been asked to be. Yeah, we're hearing his name all the time.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. There are so many people. We see, all these reports that are being pulled up. All these names again and again and again, and I know so many of them haven't been called, and so many kind of petitioned the inquiry again and again because they wanted to be involved, like Ricky Tomlinson. But they've just been removed from it. I think it's because I don't know, it's already a huge inquiry. I feel like they're just cutting it back.
Yeah, I think they're also really wary of people who they feel are going to use the opportunity to make political points. That's the impression I get from the inquiry. That they want everything to be very narrow. I mean, that's not to say that people like Lindsay German didn't make political points. Dave Morris made political points. There are plenty of people who've come to the inquiry made political points in the questioning. But, I mean, there's been numerous people. I mean, often people are in the room. Rebecca Johnson, week before last, was in the room while she was being talked about all the time, whilst, Hilary Moore was being questioned, and she kept saying, oh, you should ask Rebecca Johnson. She'd know. And she just sat there. Or Dave McNabb, when Roger Pierce was giving evidence, who was in the room, willing to give evidence, but, and again, you had Steve Sorber from Friends of Freedom Press going, you should ask Dave. I mean, I asked Dave in order to write my written statement. I wasn't sure, anything else you want to add about today's hearing?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I guess that's just also the surreal thing about actually coming to the inquiry and watching it is that there's all these interested parties, like all these people that are involved in this, that are sitting in the audience and after all these years, you've got the police officer who spied on the activists, listening to them and seeing how, you know, everyone is older, and it's just interesting dynamics. And then sorry, I'm having an eye attack. I'm not crying.
No, it's been, even though it was a half day, it's been a long half day.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to go to the pub now. I think it's very much called for. You're coming back tomorrow and Friday?
Coming back.
So you might see Beth here again. That'd be good, wouldn't it? All right, thanks for everybody following. I'll do a Twitter Spaces in a few hours. I've been live tweeting all day. The breaks, annoyingly, were only 10 minutes long this time, which means I didn't have any opportunity to see if anybody messaged me on Twitter or replied to something. I haven't looked at any of it yet. I will do later on. All right, cheers. We'll be back again in the morning, 10 a.m. More evidence from Trevor Morris. It all continues. Cheers.